Next speaker is Admiral Mark Montgomery, retired from the U.S. Navy, and I will turn it over to you, sir.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. My name is Mark Montgomery. I'm with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Like every other retired Navy admiral, I'm not an actual cyber operator. And that'll come in play over the next little bit. Look, first I want to say I brought two reports that are on the back there, one on why you need a cyber force and two on how you would do it. The remarks I'm going to do today come from both of those. I did them with a very smart woman named Dr. Erica Lonergan, who is professor at West Point for about a decade and is now at Columbia University because West Point is crucifying its Army Cyber Institute and most of its senior people left, and we can talk about how the effect that has on train, maintain, and equip. But I'll start by saying you'll hear, I will say this, I'm very frank. I think I spoke to you guys for the cyber hard problems, and I was very frank with that. And I'll be as frank as I can here. I promise no swearing, though. Hey, look, this is not about cybercom. I repeat, this is not about cybercom, and you're going to hear again and again about Cyber Command, and we're going to get a classified brief about Cyber Command. This is not about Cyber Command. This is about a failed cyber force generation model with regard to both personnel and equipment. It stems from the U.S. military's failure to recruit, train, promote, and retain talented cyber warriors for 15 years across the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, who each run their own recruitment, training, and promotion systems, engineered for a service-side need, instead of having a single pipeline for talent. I'll stop here for a second and say, there's 5 million kids graduate from high school every year. We need 200,000. 2.7 million go to college. So now we're down to 2.3 million. 76% of that next 2.3 million do not meet the physical or emotional requirements for military services. So now, we're getting down to about 600,000, of whom we need to get 200,000. Army recruiters have the hardest job in the world. They've got to get the lion's share of those kids. They have the hardest job in the world. They've got to convince 1 out of every 3 kids they talk to join the military. We don't really think of it that way. There's an Army recruiting shop, Navy, Air Force, all services in the bottom of FDD, Foundation, where I work. I talk to these guys every week. Their job sucks. Most of them are on a razor's edge of, do I get an Army Commendation Medal or a letter of reprimand for meeting or not meeting my requirement? So those guys, those men and women don't go hang out at the robotics lab or the e-gaming facility or the chess club. They go hang out outside the men's and women's locker room. And they recruit that last little group that meet the physical requirement. And if we're confused about whether the physical requirements drive it or not, Secretary Hegseth, in an interesting speech 4 weeks ago, made that really clear. That even in his generals, he values push-ups and pull-ups over any of the normal characteristics. So I would just say, this is hard, and they're not succeeding. Asking a kid, do you code Python, is not one of the top 5 questions they ask when they're recruiting. If we're recruiting a cyber force, I suspect that would be question 1. The end result is a shortage of qualified personnel at Cyber Command, which has a responsibility for both offensive and defensive aspects of military cyber operations. For the last decade, Congress has seen this problem on a bipartisan basis and made it clear about its sharp concern over cyber personnel issues. By the way, that's how you got Cyber Command 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. I know they're telling you they have 2.0. This is Cyber Command about 6.0. This is the first time they got snazzy and named it something different. But we're on the 6th iteration of how Cyber Command does business and works with the services. I hold that in the back of your mind when you think about how many Afghan plans did we have before we finally realized we didn't have a plan. Look, the military leaders address this through personnel shortage. They do this by massaging statistics, and we've documented some pretty serious massaging by the services and Cyber Command. Massaging being moving people around between units so that the unit would get the appropriate level of certification and readiness, and then moving that young kid to the next unit, to the next unit. We have colonels and generals acknowledging that. And I'm sure we can get you their actual testimonies if you need them. Or they kind of promise iterative changes rather than fix the kind of underlying problem. the killer on this is that I was part of the deal that's when we slapped the table in 2010 to 2000 with Brigadier General Nakasone and Major General Breedlove. And I remember Roughhead talking, there's a group of us talking to us. The issue wasn't how many people do we really need for Cyber Command? It was, if you agree to more than 2,300, continue to your office on your way out the building. And we all agreed, I think the three primary services to 2,100 or 20,050, and the Marine Corps picked up like 300 or 400. That's been our force level for the cyber mission force for 15 years. Now General Nakasone did a great job of very publicly adding 3% in 2022, actually over a 5-year period, adding 3%. Let's think about the Chinese operating services. Here's where a classified brief would be useful. What was their size in 2012? About 10, we think between 6 and 10,000. What's their size today? Between 60,000 and 70,000. Somebody grew 800 to 1,000%, and somebody grew 3%. I'm not saying their number's right. I'm saying our number's wrong. Why couldn't we grow more than 3%? Because of jackasses like me and the Navy staff who made damn sure we didn't defund ship manning, or on the Air Force staff, defund squadron manning, on the Army staff, defund battalion manning. The services have not, have never, and will not prioritize this mission. We literally had a chief of naval operations who was both the J3 at Cyber Command and 10th Fleet, became the head of the Navy and screwed cyber. And if you call him, he'll tell you, we probably need a cyber force. Actually, he'll tell you, we definitely need a cyber force. I'm just saying, those are the facts. Look, we know the certifications that came about when they made these minor changes were hollow. Cyber Command shifted people. Our research paints an alarming picture. There's an inefficient division of labor between the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, and it prevents the proper generation of cyber force needed to carry out the mission. Recruitment suffers because cyber operators are not a top priority for any of the services. And the incentives for new recruits vary wildly. I'm going to tell you a little bit about pay in a minute. So my son's an ensign, right? He makes 44 grand. He thought that was a good number. He went to Brown, got a master's while he was there. His girlfriend went to Brown, now fiance. She went to work for McKinsey. He did not think 44 was a bad number till she mentioned she made 250 in her first year out, and her bonus structure the first year was 48, more than his pay. He prorated, he made 22. I'm just saying, he's now pissed. Sailors get pissed, not because they're not paid enough, but because the person next to them is paid differently. And I'm going to tell you, throughout Cyberforce, that's ubiquitous. The retention rates for qualified personnel are low because of this inconsistent policies, and also institutional cultures that don't value them. And I'm not talking about Cyber Command's culture. Again, Cyber Command, I love Cyber Command. I was there at the creation, I believe. But I believe Cyber Command is being let down by the services and will never be properly serviced. No matter what you hear. And by the way, that whole Cyber Command 2.0, there's like 2 lines in there, the services will. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you put Randy George or Dave or Cottle or Cruiser Willsback on a lie detector and say, where is Cyber Command in your top priorities? He'll say it's a top priority. It's in the top 15. What's number 1 in the Navy? Submarines. Number 2, surface ships, carriers. Number 3, surface ships. Number 4, fighter aircraft. Number 5, amphibious. I mean, blah, 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 blah. Cyber's around 11, 12, 13. Here's who gets fed at the trough, 1 through 5. 6 through 10 get just enough scraps to stay alive. 11 through 15 struggle. Cyber is a struggler in every service. Look, we concluded after a while that the only way to resolve this was the creation of a new independent armed service, a U.S. Cyber Force. So Dr. Lonergan and I wrote that. And look, I didn't believe it. It's not in, I was the executive director of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. I wrote a large part of the report. I did not put Cyber Command in there because I didn't want to believe it. Just like I kept re-signing up for Afghanistan because I didn't want to believe we didn't have a plan. I was wrong then. I was wrong on cyber. We do not have a plan. By the way, I love that new force generation memo. By the way, the word force generation added to the top of that does not make it actual force generation. It's a discussion of how Cyber Command will operate and how they'll affect the force. There's great stuff in there. I believe in everything in there, except the part where it goes, the services will do this, that, and the other thing. Then I'm like, nope. Cyber Command will do what's in there for Cyber Command, and they'll do a good job. But do not believe for a minute the service is going to support them. Look, there's ample evidence for this approach. There's historical IC. And on the battlefield, we learned that the Air Force needed to be separated, and we did it in 1947. If you go back, there is the same, like, and this is a much bigger separation than Cyberforce. There's dead generals everywhere over this decision. Turns out it was the right one. All right, so be careful when they say this will break the service. We just cleaved Space Command out, which is going to end up being about 25% larger than not Space Command, Space Force out. And it's going to, I think, in the long term, be 25% bigger than Cyber Force. By the way, I'm hoping you guys come to the conclusion we need one. I don't worry that before I die, we'll have a Cyber Force. And I'm going to live like 15 more years max. Because the enemy will continue to vote, and eventually we'll have one. I think the smart group is the one who figures out how to have one before the enemy instructs you on needing one. We're headed to that moment. Look, an independent cyber service would naturally prioritize the creation of a uniform approach to recruitment, training, promotion, and retention of qualified personnel. You will not have differences if you have one service. And those skills will absolutely correspond to Cyber Command's every desire. In theory, my perfect world is you command the Cyber Force and then you command Cyber Command through 2-3 year assignments. I wouldn't do the nuclear one that they're thinking about for different things. I would go 3 and 3. You produce the force, that's the force you utilize. I'm going to tell you the extreme focusing effect that'll have on a commander. As a ship CO, I built a beautiful ship, the best ship in the fleet. I know it. I never commanded it because I turned it over to somebody else who commanded it. Because you build a ship that's going to operate 2 to 3 years later. In addition to a single dedicated cyber training and development schoolhouse will help, and an independent service could, and this is the big part, an independent service could, without having to worry about planes and tanks and ships, they could actually excel at the rapid acquisition of new cyber warfare systems in a properly oversought system. So Katie was just here. Katie and I, and is Josh Steifel spoken to you guys? Josh Steifel are the 3 people who created the ECP, ECP, thank you. The enhanced procurement capability, EPC, thank you. Enhanced procurement capability for Cyber Command. When doing it, Representative Lanchman said, isn't this illegal or counter to policy? And we said, yes, sir. But the services are so terrible. They cannot do procurement. Let's just give Cyber Command $75 million. The reason he thought it was inappropriate was because they had no oversight. He was right, by the way. And in the absence of the services doing crap for the next 5 years, what do we do to EPC? We grew it from 75 million to about $1 billion now. In a very lightly oversought. In other words, when I buy a plane or train, I agree with Secretary Hegseth that we got to fix our procurement system for planes and aviation, for everything. It 100% needs an overhaul. The one thing that works is oversight. The service is oversighting the procurement to make sure that officers like me who are only 2 years in a program and leave don't screw things up. Officers like me who don't know how to do contracting don't screw things up. You have the civilian oversight that does it. Cyber Command will tell you now, the first 2 years I'd asked, they would come back in official statements that say, we don't have oversight. We don't need it. They realized that was the illegal answer. So now they say an office at OSD, I believe in R&E, oversees it, oversizes it. I call that person and ask them the detail that he or she gives that versus the stuff they do inside OSD. You need a service to oversee these things, but the services won't build them. So you're trapped unless you get a different service. Look, there are alternative approaches you'll hear. Cyber Command, it's got to be SOCOM. Where, let's be clear, SOCOM and Cyber Command are not the same thing. SOCOM feeds at the trough. Those SEALs, the Rangers are 1 or 2. Delta, even AFSOC struggles a little because they're not fighter. Everyone who's not a fighter pilot struggles in the Air Force, at the trough, at the food trough. But they do okay. They do a lot better in cyber. Soft guys walk into the room and SWOs like surface, combat arms officers like me go, okay, hey, buddy, you're me. Come on in. What's your budget? I gotcha. And by the way, SOCOM doesn't train SEALs and Rangers and AFSOC pilots together. And here's another one. If I'm getting in an AFSOC like CV-22 to go kill somebody, and I look up front and there's 2 Navy SEALs flying it, I'm walking back off that plane, right? They're not the same thing. Stop believing this was it's bull, this model. They make it sound like it's a fact. So, and because they're in uniform or formally really well, it's SOCOM model. It's not the SOCOM model. Look at SOLIC, Assistant Secretary's oversight requirements versus Katie's. I wrote the bill that created the law that created Katie. I put tons of oversight in there. DOD took it all out. That was their one thing to get the bill across the line so we could create it. And Michael Schulmeyer was the first one, and then Katie. DOD's not interested in. SOCOM's not the model. Others say, hey, Cyber Command, that's kind of what 2.0, just plus a sublet. We'll do it. We'll do it. So I'm sure you're going to hear about the dual head, right? So here's a dude or a woman, I think they've all been men so far, who is with NSA and Cyber Command. And there is about 52 senators who think that's right and 48 who think it's wrong. So smart people on both sides of this issue. The long term, we got to separate these two. And the theory of the game right now is Cyber Command and DOD's official position is keep them together. And by the way, add the force generation mission in. I'm sorry. The number one reason for separating them was to alleviate the decision making by one person. And the new argument made in a different room that they hope the same people aren't in the room is let's add a third thing in there. Please. America's force generation system is clearly broken. Fixing it demands nothing less than the establishment of a service. I got a few slides I think are useful. Is there a clicker? Click if you're next, please. Thanks. Sorry if I'm like aggressive on this. I've spent 5 years or 4 years since I had my epiphany working this issue, or maybe 3.5. And I am constantly surprised at the weird facts of that. I just want to make sure force generation primer, there is force employment. Cyber Command and the geographic combatant commanders are responsible for America's force employment, employing military force in and through cyberspace to generally go kick an enemy's butt. Despite additional resources and authorities over the years, the readiness of these forces has not sufficiently improved. No one said, and by the way, we can't grow it at all, right? I already had that rant. You can't grow it, and you can't improve the readiness. At the same time, America's adversaries, as I mentioned, continue to grow their cyber capabilities. I should mention, Russia has grown not like us and not like China. And Russia has a bifurcated system between people who are in the government and people who are in contracting things that do things for the government and do cyber crime. But overall growing, not like China. The 5 military services, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Space Force, are largely responsible for force generation in cyberspace, organizing, training, and equipping cyber forces. As I said, the existing prioritization model struggles. So next slide. We all want to get to an end state. I think Paul Nakasone said it beautifully a couple of years ago. He said, the only thing he knows is wrong is the status quo. The only thing he knows is wrong for sure is the status quo. I agree with him. And iterating on the status quo is not the answer. We want a desired end state that the department produces the world's dominant cyber force. It develops innovative and agile cyber leaders, and it continually equips the most advanced cyber warfighting capabilities. And we think it should be able to do these, a lot of, I should say that, a few other facts I want to get up there were that we got to have an assumption that the existing services, my assumption is existing services are not going to get better at this. If you bring people in here who tell you that, you really need to grind them down. I don't mean Cyber Command people. I mean Army, Navy, Air Force people who say we've changed. You need to see actual facts, not I pledge to you I'm going to change. That's what Cyber Command's heard. By the way, every Cyber Command general officer and flag officer should believe me because they've heard the BS for 12 years. We're going to get better. It's like my kids, after a while, I know they're not coming home at curfew, right? All right, next slide. The things I want to do are these specifically, this Paul, Tim, and I agree. Paul, Dr. Tim Hawk, and I agree completely on this, that you want these 8 or 7 force generation capabilities to defend the nation's rights, to deter and defeat. And I'm saying the only way to get there is to change the model. You're not going to get to those 7 things with, taking the deck chairs and moving around 4 or 5 places on the Titanic. Next slide. Look, to achieve this mission, I think you got to get 4 things right. You got to produce the world's preeminent military cyber personnel. You got to recruit in the right place. You got to recruit kids who code Python to begin with. You got to recruit kids, who are in the e-gaming and the robotics lab, and kids who are fat, and kids who have face tattoos, and kids who used a lot of weed. It's okay. Now the Army recruiter's like, nope, 3. I'm moving on, right, on that kid. He's not going to find out. By the way, when do you pick cyber? You don't pick it like when they recruit you. You go to a DEP or a MEP, depending on your service, where you sit down. And if you're a Navy guy, and I'm a nuclear engineer, so I'm guilty, you go in there, you take a test. If you're in the top 20%, they're just working you over for nuke. And then they're like offering you more and more money. We'll give you money for going to the class. We'll give you money for graduating from prototype, money for graduating from power school. And the reenlistment is $60,000 a year times 5 years, $300,000. And we'll wait till you're in a tax-free zone. So it's tax-free. We're going to go through, and this kid's going to be like, wait a minute, you're going to quintuple my pay? What was that second job? No. Well, actually, the second job's Aegis, and they give about half of that. Cyber doesn't get dealed. It's not at the table. So don't fool yourself. Recruit in the right places, fully capitalize the nations. We have enough talent. How many cyber people do you think we need? I think it's about a 16,000 person service. To do that, the Space Force guys, General Raymond, who'd be good to have talk to you, says you're going to need about 1,500 to 2,000 a year. This will not break us. We can find 1,500 to 2,000 smart kids that meet this if we look for them. If we don't look for them, we won't find them. I guarantee that. It means looking beyond the traditional recruitment pool. And then I'm going to talk a little bit later about Guard and Reserve, but they're going to be critical to this. We've been trying to fix the National Guard as a cyber force and create a cyber reserve. So far total, I've never asked Stifle to look at this, but I think it's like 42 pieces of legislation over the last 8 years. None of which have done, the only ones that have passed have been studies, which means do nothing. Not that this study is going to not do nothing, but we actually asked for a study on this. They were converted into studies and then filed away because the National Guard does not get. National Guard's like, if you add cyber to my mission, the National Guard commander, I'm going to do less of my most important mission, which is respond to casualties, because he doesn't see cyber as a disaster, natural disaster. Yeah.
All right. Is your underlying assumption that everybody who's part of the cyber force, forget how it's organized, is a uniformed military? Oh, okay. Okay.
Develop innovative and agile cyber leaders. Leaders got to grasp the technical and social complexities of cyberspace. Leaders will be essential for bridging the gap between cyber and traditional military. Some of those officers will move into joint commands and come back. But one service, the Navy, fought even creating a cyber operator for a decade. And we wrote a law, and now they have cyber operators. That's not the way to do things, by the way. You want the service to want to do it. I'll also tell you, Naval Academy, twice now, has allowed what are called not physically qualified people, I would describe them as the football team, and a few other athletes, to prick first. Cyber has this weird thing of being right next to Annapolis, at Fort Meade. You think you're going to get Fort Meade. You may or may not, but you think you're going to get Fort Meade. You're not going to go to sea, you think. So they pick it. 4 years ago, we ended up with a class average from that group of about 900, which I think there's like 1050 graduates. This year, they tried to do it again. Luckily, the superintendent, Yvette Davids, even after the treatment she got with a week to go, intervened and changed it. But the athletic director was not happy. But that's the dilemma we deal with. And by the way, Naval Academy produces 4 cyber operators a year and 3 cyber warfare engineers. West Point produces 41. Oh, the Army. And the Army, I always say the Army is the best, but I'll give you 2 years ago, the Army produced 41 kick-ass Army cyber operators at West Point and 40 kick-ass from ROTC. Then they realized they didn't have the pipeline right at Eisenhower. And they told the 40 ROTC, you have 3 choices. Switch majors. Switch your MOS in the Army, become Intel. Delay your commissioning a year. or buy yourself out of your, assume a college program so they could just go reserves. None of the 40 ROTC went, including the number one kid from Carnegie Mellon, who I would have taken over I love Army Cyber Institute in West Point. The number one Army ROTC at Carnegie Mellon, you're not commissioned cyber, you're going to go military intelligence. Is this how you run? Oh, this is crazy. All right. You got to equip your cyber forces with the most advanced cyber warfighting capabilities. It's got to be the world leader in development and deployment of effective cyber capabilities. Here, I think everyone you're going to hear says the same thing. Leveraging commercial, experimental, exquisite technologies for offense, defense, and intelligence. I just think you can do that best from a service dedicated to this with a teams of procurement people who only do cyber, don't rotate out because they're the COCOM, things like that. They're in the Assistant Secretary of Cyber's office. The service require adaptable organizations as well. Next slide. I would just say, yeah. See if I got all of these. Yep. Next slide. Look, on the core design principles, one more, please. Sorry. Look, we want quality over quantity. This is not a this is not a, how many people do I need? Like the Army measures its strength by the size of its numbers of its people, the Navy by the number of ships, the Air Force by the number of fighter squadrons, overall squadrons, but really fighter squadrons. We got to not be worried about that. It's not the number of CPTs, it's what can we do with them. There are CPTs with 40 people that do more than the next 15 CPTs together, cyber protect and the mission force teams. We need an expertise-based career progression model. More than these highly technical ratings, more than anything, it's based on what's your expertise. Now, this is where the civilians come in my mind. Civilians in there, that you don't have to worry. Did you take your senior NCO course? Don't care. Did you take your junior NCO? Don't care. My job is I'm a civilian in the cyber force doing this work. Look, I think over time, you're going to have to iterate and adapt the force structure. If you ask me how many people, my answer is like 15,000. Erica's answer was 11,000. If I ask Jan or TJ's in this, right? TJ, who've all worked at this, they might come up with 7 or 15, who knows? None of the answers we give you are right, but it's a number you would get to over time. Space Force is doing this right now. They were at 7, they started at 9, said they'd be 30, then came to 13, said they'd be 20, then came to 17, said they'd be 18. I think they're settling in somewhere around there. And John Raymond would tell you, I was completely swagging it when I was creating the Space Force. Here, with a little bit of, they had no heads up because the president just said, jump, right? Here, the reason I wrote this was because I was afraid this president would say, jump. And weirdly, the president emailed me over something and he said, you got anything else? I said, I'll give you one thing, create a cyber force. We went back and forth for about 5 minutes, but I didn't see a cyber force the next day. So I guess I failed. Or they told him who I was and he said, I'm not listening to you. All right, next one. So I think this gets at what's the core design. I think it's got to be organized within the armed forces. I still think it's a separate independent Title 10 military service. I would put it under the Department of the Army. There's a Navy and Marine Corps, Air Force and Space Force. Plus, Army's tried harder. They just have in every way possible. And I like Eisenhower. What's the name of that base again? They renamed Fort Gordon, right? It was Fort. I like Eisenhower, but whatever it is, down there in Georgia. That's a great base to base this out of. They've got new construction there. They're doing pretty well. The Army really values numbers of people, so getting more numbers will make the Army happy. They might take big Army might take better care of it. Responsible for developing the joint concepts in cyberspace and drive requirements across what's called the .mil PF. And look, the services, it's going to have to still relate to Cyber Command. You know, it is directly related to Cyber Command, and it still relates to the existing services. And the existing services are still going to maintain some distinct functions. If you ask Cyber Command every once in a while when they thought they might get jammed with the Cyber Force, one of our friendly 4-stars would put out, oh, it'll be 210,000 people, which I would describe as a poison pill, right? You tell somebody, all the other services are like, oh, heck, because it was the whole like IT network of the governments, I mean, of the .mil. It's not going to be 210,000 people. But here's the cool stuff. I think they'll have no trouble drawing people. I do not think, and I think this is, Dennis Velez didn't come. I don't think you need to talk. You can talk to a recently retired general or admiral that's worked there. I think they'll all be honest about it. People are not thrilled with the current force generation. I would say 80 to 90%. Josh Steif will tell you 100%, but I think it's more like 80, 90% when we interview them. That doesn't mean they want a cyber force, but they're unhappy with the current force generation model. So I think you'll get volunteers into this. The big deal is the proportion of civilians to uniformed military personnel. Look, my son's ship has 240 guys in uniform, men and women in uniform on it, 3 permanent civilians. They help with the Aegis radar and a couple other things. Air Force squadron would be more like 95% to 5%. Army battalions are pretty close to 100 to 0. Not here. Even the current CMFs run at about 80-20 uniform civilian. I want 50-50 or 30-70. I'd be okay with that. And I want to be able to move back and forth into the private sector. And if they're in civilian clothes to begin with, it's going to be easy. You just have to join the cyber reserves. That's coming up in 2 bullets. You know, back and forth, getting iterative, getting smart, making the infrastructure smarter. I think a cyber National Guard and reserve element can work if you have a cyber force. It was the one thing that's missing the previous 42 times we did legislation. The cyber guard, right now, there's a real problem with cyber guard. There's 3 fantastic cyber guards, or 2 fantastic ones, Maryland and Virginia, shockingly, where Fort Meade is and where all the government workers who got out and are now working in IT are. Texas, TJ will tell you, is 3rd. That I don't, yeah, it will be. I'll give him a will be. Arizona, which you would think, kick-ass TSMC being built there, 3 people, 3 cyber people in their guard. Not 3 battalions, not 3 companies, not 3 squads. A colonel who's kick-ass, and 2, a warrant officer and a civilian, and a sergeant. That's it. So we have this inconsistency. I'm not saying every guard has to have this, but what you have to do is organize your cyber guard regionally in groups. But you want people in lots of places so they have the relationships with the governor and with the infrastructures, because everyone's saying, how are we defending our domestic network? So we're going to get a letter of marque. I cannot tell you what a bad, I've testified 3 times. I once had this guy, Eli Crane, who's crazy from Arizona, screaming at me because I wouldn't agree to a letter of marque. I'm like, I want to maintain escalation management at Cyber Command or in the White House, not at Booz Allen. And I don't dislike Booz Allen. I'm just saying not at some contractor that we gave a letter of marque to, and they went too far. I mean, I shared that my same feeling for like Eric Prince and whatever that, you know, those things, right? I just say, I think about Fallujah and I'm like, no, not again. Look, I think the budgets will be close initially, but no, this will grow the budget because it will grow. And all budgets, all department budgets are about 52% personnel between what we pay the kids and their retirement and their TRICARE, their medical, all that stuff. So if we grow the cyber force, that's a good growth in budget. I'll defend that. I'll defend having more a bigger CMF or NMF. And I'll just 2 other things. One thing on SOCOM, I got to say, this is the other one. Part of it is they don't grow together, but the other is, let's say I'm on a submarine, and let's say that I'm on a submarine and I want to blow up a train trestle in North Korea. If you read the New York Times, this is not a completely unbelievable story. And I look over and I say, I got to send 2 operatives in to go do it. And instead of 2 SEALs, I see 2 C-130 like Air Force. I'm going to be, where are the 2 SEALs? You're going to SEALs to go do this, right? SEALs go swim 50 miles or whatever, take their little boats and go blow stuff up. If it's a cyber attack on that train trestle, do I care what service sits next to me? No, I don't care. It's whoever researched the rail system. It could be any service. It just doesn't matter. The SOCOM model is not applicable. All right, and then just my last thoughts. I know I'm kind of repeating myself, but I do get passionate about this. I think years after designating cyberspace as a warfighting domain, leaders have to acknowledge the kind of writing that's on the wall. The scope and scale of the cyber threats are growing. China is our pacing threat nationally, strategically, and in cyberspace. They've centralized their cyber capabilities. In fact, they put them into strategic forces and then pulled them out of that and just put them into cyber forces. They're going one way. We're thinking about going the other. I think conventional wisdom is correct that if the U.S. military gets the cyber force generation right, we can fight and win in cyberspace. But you have to get the force generation right. That's what your panel is about. It's not about how can Cyber Command get 3 more authorities to kick ass in cyberspace. That's important. If you see one, I'd mention it. But what you're here to do is determine what is the right force generation model for the military. And I just think at this point, the United States has a limited window of opportunity to reorganize, to allocate its resources and develop a sustainable cyber force readiness. The U.S. military has failed to fix this problem on its own. It's not like they don't know it. They know it. I think only the president or Congress can fix this. And to the degree to which your report influences them, it's important that you get them on the right track. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. That was almost time to this. We'll do Natalie, then Scott.
Hey, Mark. So everything you're talking about, crafting a cyber force makes sense, right? And it would be a force provider for Cyber Command and other folks. However, services would retain the need to still have ITs and cyber people to engineer, install, operate, maintain, and defend those service networks. Okay. So my question riffs off your comments about the recruiter. So if I'm an 18-year-old walking into a multi-service recruiter's office and I say, I want to fly, I would argue that there's probably a series of about 10 questions they're going to run me through or so to figure out, do I want to fly and land on the land or on something that floats in the ocean? Do I want to do fixed wing? Do I want to do rotary wing? What's the mission I want to do to help figure out, like, would I be better to try to become an Army aviator or a Marine aviator or an Air Force aviator, right? So my question to you is, based on how you envision what a cyber service or cyber force is, what are those questions? How does that kid walking in at 18 and says, I want to do cyber, do we figure out, does he or she actually want to be part of join the cyber force or the Army or the Air Force or the Marines or the Navy? Like, how do you explain that to an 18-year-old?
No, I agree. And one thing I would say is the services, I don't know if you've been in these recruiting shops, they do keep doors and walls and restrain people physically from leaving if they can, to go to the other one, especially if they're like the nukes, like we get really worried if they head over to the Air Force, because there's some good Air Force aviation technician bonuses. Look, so first, I think you got to have I think Cyberforce has to have a very specific set of questions that don't start with, let's go take a physical fitness test. You have to not die on us. I mean, there's physical fitness requirements, but it's not a pull-up, push-up test right off the bat. It's have you coded before? What have you coded? What's your gaming? What's your expertise in this? I think it's a different one. And the beauty is we're only trying to get, like I said, 1,500 people a year from, probably by law, we'd have to have 50, just the way, I don't want to get into Congress, but they'd be like, you're having a cyber force in every state. And then a lot more in California, New York, Texas, around Austin, a few other places, we'd really have them. But I think you first get at, what's your culture? What's your cyber culture? How much have you worked in it? That's how I'd head at this. I would say if someone just misses their cut, like the recruiter sitting there, I mean, it's to his best interest or her best interest to say to the person, we're not right for you for some reason, but you need to go next door and keep saying the word IT. Now, unfortunately, when that guy shows up at Navy, the submariners are going to be like, all right, let's get a look at it. But the ASVAB won't, there's portions of the ASVAB that won't bother me as they break down the ASVAB, the armed services, you have a vocational test. There are portions in there that get right at this, your creative thought, your multiple, there's a portion of it that's multiple decisions could be made, which one's the best one kind of thought. You want to see how the kids answer those questions. So that's how I target it. I am not a professional recruiter, but I promise you, if you create a cyber force, I will write that immediately. But I know somebody else will too. The C1 of Cyberforce will.
Yeah, but that also sounds like the only way that you would be recruiting the folks that you'd want into the force is that you'd have to completely restructure the requirements, right? Like, and so because I would argue that the Army wants really great defenders to help defend
Yeah.
Army weapons platforms and Army, and the Navy wants folks to defend ships.
I'm not sure you mean the other kind of stuff, the kinetic stuff.
Well, no, like as a cyber person in the Army.
I don't
like,
think
you're-
they work real hard at it. Honestly, go to cyber. I mean, I'm going to be careful what I say here because I'm sure there's a recruiter out there kicking ass in cyber, but the recruiting process does not do that. It is really oriented towards Navy nuke. There's a SEAL portion. Like if a kid walks in that just ripples, they're like, boom, hey, let's go take that physical fitness test right now. Because there's certain things they're looking for, some endurance things that aren't necessarily visible in somebody. But I mean, it's interesting to watch. It's almost, I'm not saying you guys should go down and watch a recruiting session, but it is interesting to watch. The most important thing is the depth. I did go to one of those where they rated people, pulled people into ratings. Now, this isn't your permanent rating. It could change at boot camp, but it generally doesn't. It was jaw dropping. I mean, just the lean the Navy put on nuke. And SEAL, nuke, Aegis, everything else. And I would say cyber was in the middle of everything else. I'll give you one more. This is what kills me. I don't know if Katie or Josh brought it up, but the three of us, along with the president, interviewed a lieutenant colonel who ran open source software, a squadron that did things with open source software. I'll just say that. And so, and he was there, and his XO was there, and the two of them were there. And they said at one point, after like talking around a little bit, they finally said, we use 6 or 8 of our people out of about 96, or let's just say 100, 6 or 8 of our people to do this coding. The other 90 people are great Americans, but they just have not developed to the level you need to be able to do this where I can trust them. And he says, when I lose 2 of those, like in one thing, my readiness as a unit goes down. Now, when I was commander of a carrier strike group, I had a carrier air wing. If I went into one of the squadrons and the CO went, hey, Monty, or hey, sir, fantastic news. I'm up to 4 of my 30 pilots are good to go. I would go, you're fired, your XO's fired, your ops officer's fired, your training officer's fired. Where's the CAG? I need to fire him and his deputy. I mean, we don't fire people like that, but I mean, you just wouldn't accept that. But and so I said, well, is it, and the guy goes, there's a squad, this is 196, 198. He says the squadron right next door is in the same bag of donuts. The exact same issue. We just can't do it. So I asked an NSA guy a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to get you guys his name, but I don't know that he'll talk. I was surprised he talked. He came to the CSIS task force. I was surprised to see him there because for lots of reasons, telling us the truth isn't smart. He said, especially me, he said, the real problem is something called, he says, look, the Navy, Marnie, he told me, he's picking on me. He goes, you say they only have 70% of what they need. They actually have 94% billets filled or 93% billets filled. 80% with people who are qualified. That does get you to 74%, which is what I was saying. But he says, but it's much worse than you think. Of that 74% that's qualified, 90% of them are what's called basic. There's basic, senior, and master. You're supposed to have a distribution across these. At minimum, a leadership triangle, not a leadership line to a flat box at the bottom, which is what we have. That gets into the training and maintaining. And by the way, when someone gets to master, what do you think happens to that man or woman? No, NSA swoops in like a hawk, okay, grabs that guy or girl and yanks him away with a real pay package. Yeah, not my son's ensign pay package. And I'm gonna just tell you a little trick. Just so you know how, I think most of you know military pay. So my son makes 42,000. We'll double his pay in 4 years. He'll make 88 as a 03/4. That's a trick to keep him in because that's when they do their first agreement. They'll go get master's degree and stay in. After that, it doesn't double again. The period. I mean, the next doubling is the actual cap of 2, 3, and 4 stars. So in that range from 8 years to NSA, I'm confident. I know they're not evil, but when they look at a young guy between 6 years in when they've shown enough skill, that's about, even the studs take time to develop. Till about 10 or 12 years in, they can swoop and grab before the guy's committed to the 20-year retirement or the woman's committed. I mean, if I was at NSA, I'd be evil. Cyber Command would probably cease functioning because I can't restrain myself. But it would be easy to grab these people. And there's a sense of mission accomplishment on, because of all those other issues, Cyber Command has a different sense of mission accomplishment than NSA. And by different, I mean lower. NSA, and again, you need to talk to some NSA people about this, but it's a pretty straightforward thing. The type of target sets they're working over are different than Cyber Command. Not everyone in Cyber Command, and some of the best ones in Cyber Command get pulled in as military people into NSA units so they can go hit them. But generally speaking.
Scott.
Mark, it's unfortunate you came here without any passion for what you believe in.
Yeah.
And I hope your analysis was solid. I hope the one you got wrong was on your 15-year lifespan, sir. But
Yeah.
keep you around. So I saw this from the Space Force perspective at Space Command, and there was a conversation of we'll create the Space Force, and that will alleviate the other services from doing space-based operations and that sort of thing. Which turned out to be not the case. They then created maritime space officers. We then created all the service components to do space. And so I haven't read your paper. I will. I'm wondering as you go through this concept of creating a cyber force, will in your paper, will the services still have to do defense of their own networks, or does the cyber force come in and defend their networks?
No, so I think that's a great question. I think they defend their own networks. Now, offensive defense, there's a type of defense that will be reserved for the cyber operating force, for the cyber mission force, and both inside DoD, but also in our national critical. One of the things we're not talking about here, there's a whole mission set out there not getting done. If you're Southern Company and a cruise missile's headed towards your nuclear reactor down at Votel, Tom Fanning, whoever the new CEO is, his belief is that the U.S. Air Force is going to shoot that thing down. He has not built a NASAM system around Votel to defend it. And by the way, we're going to see this problem in drones very quickly, but the idea is the military defends it. But if the same country, China or Russia, has its advanced persistent threat team work his teams over to take down his reactor, even cause two problems. And I will just say, Americans accept regulation in 3 areas: nuclear power, financial services, and air travel. So NRC, that we do have some good cybersecurity to nuclear power plants, but let's say they get through, which I think they would over time. There's no cavalry, there's no air defense, there's no Army air defense, Air Force pilot plane coming to save them right now, because the only forces that could do it are Title 50, and most of us are pretty squeamish about Title 50 running on Title 10. I mean, running on the domestic networks. The next one up is we tried to avoid this by creating something called the HURT teams at CISA, which is HURT, Hunt and Incident Response Teams, a complete failure by us. And Landry and I conceded too many agreements to DHS, so that it's become like a internal it's become like a informing you about problems thing instead of a going out and fix it. It was supposed to be like 10 CPTs. It's one CPT that doesn't leave its network. And so that leaves the National Guard. I mean, it leaves Title 10 forces, which there's not enough of, or the National Guard, which is not ready to do it. Again, the only way I think we get this fixed is cyber. It is a cyber force. By the way, on the space stuff, you do have to have Raymond here, because he won't agree with everything I said, but he'll agree with a lot, and he'll say, here's the craziest thing. You know what the biggest problem with the services was? It was general officer billets, because that's who we are in the services. It was Space Force is now 22 general officers, and the Navy had to give up 2, the Marine Corps had to give up 1, the Army had to give up 4 or 5. And that was like, that was like cracking the Rosetta Stone to get those. The Air Force grudgingly, because it's their own service secretary, gave up theirs over time. But that was one of the biggest problems he faced, was just getting it. So he had the leadership right. Now, I'm not saying you need 22 general officers for cyber force, but I'm saying it'd be nice. By the way, wouldn't it be cool if the next cyber force commander had cyber expertise? Let me know if that's what happens while you're doing this thing. I think it's gonna be someone who can kick ass and push-ups. In fact, I know it's gonna be someone who's gonna kick ass and push-ups. All right, sorry.
Jan, then Peter.
I think all of our questions, Natalie, Scott, mine, are circling around sort of a similar issue. You said in the beginning, this is not about Cyber Command.
Yeah.
But you also said there will be service retained cyber missions. So the fourth generation model that you're proposing with a service is fourth generation for Cyber Command. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay,
Well, no, and the CPTs
okay.
at the geographic
Okay.
combatant commands, which are about a third of the load. You're right.
When we,
2/3 cyber command.
sorry, when we think about ongoing issues inside of each of the services, and it gets to the OT that Natalie mentioned, the defense of our high valued, platform based systems that we have out there, this doesn't solve that problem. Depending, okay, because I feel like our task is organizational models of the U.S. Armed Forces, which has to include everything. So considering how that gets addressed or not addressed, because the services still have to recruit for that, would still have to recruit for that, assuming that they put any priority into
Yeah.
defending our OT systems.
Yeah, they still gonna have to recruit for IT network management
Yeah.
and for some defensive cyber operations. Which is the defensive issues. By the way, they're not doing those now.
I know.
I mean,
Yeah.
that this is,
Agreed.
what I'm talking about is being able to do better cost imposition. Look, I'm not fixing all three legs of the cyber deterrence stool, which is cost imposition, entanglement, which the military really doesn't do, and deterrence by denial,
Yeah.
which is what you're mentioning. Do I think we would be in a better position if we built a better offensive system? Yes, because it can cheat into the defensive networks and it can provide expertise. Right now, we can't even do that. So it will make things better. It will not, but it would be inappropriate to say it would fix it.
Yeah.
The services still do it. Now, sometimes getting kicked in the teeth, which is what this would be to the service. In the end, like the Guild Days of the world would go, well, thank God we got rid of them. Others would be like, hey, I can't believe you ripped 2,300 people away from me.
Yeah. Okay,
Go fix the other 16,000 we left you with, or 18,000 we left you with, and then we can talk again. But right now, the thing is kind of trust us, we'll fix all of them. And by the way, the Cyber Command 2.0 thing doesn't fix that other problem either. It just says, we're going to try to like get on a space, the thing that was on Star Trek that could detach, the command module. You're like, we're just going to detach from the rest of the military, it'd be all right. I should say, when I say this is not about Cyber Command, this is not about whether Cyber Command's a kick. This is not about whether Cyber Command are good people or bad people. This is about, are we going to make Cyber Command an ass-kicking organization in the future? And my answer is not if we continue to do force generation the way we're doing it. And that's why, so that's a fair statement. I will say, there's a world in which this gets to like 20,000 and then you're bleeding back in 1,000 to help services, but at a high level, just like SEALs show up on Navy staffs to help with those kind of issues. Now, the SEALs don't go kill people on Navy staffs that I know of, but so this would be a little more than that. Technical advice and things like that.
in the force generation model, as we build experts that
Yeah.
Cyber Command will need to be able to deliver effects in maritime technologies or aircraft, et cetera. I mean, those are the same skills that this.
They don't get to feed them back in, yeah.
They potentially could feed them
Yeah.
back in because
And that's a great part, because I didn't mention this. One of the things that's killing us is the number of skill sets you need in Cyber Command. I mean, to be for offensive cyber operations, let's say there's 40, I'm making that up, 6 are in the cloud, or this, but a couple of them are service specific. You get a AQD for that, for an officer, or a NEC, for whatever the terminology we end up using that service, that says they're that thing, so that they're put in the right teams later on, but also so that in a future world, you can bring them back. But I'd be lying if I said, after you get 15,000 kicking ass, the next thing is to go help the services on that problem. I'd say, no, grow to 30. Get your offensive right. I am really worried about our offensive cyber capability, our ability to impose cost on an adversary in a way that they think they should not impose cost on us.
Sorry, you said you did, you don't worry about that?
No, I do worry about that. I worry about the defensive one, but I would feed the first thing I would feed is the growth of cyber force, of the cyber mission force. Now look, that's not how DoD works. The Secretary of Defense will be, you work for me and you're getting really good at that. I want some of that honey. I want some of that sugar back in these units. So in the end, the guy running cyber force or woman running cyber force is going to have to service both of those. That would be a luxury though. If you were telling me you're fixing two different problems, one's growing cyber force as a kick-ass force and the other's making the DCO of our major systems okay. But I don't even, the truth, this, the PEOs, the first thing they cut out of every weapon system is cybersecurity. And then they say shit, like they say stuff to us in the Senate. Oh, Mark, there's a chapeau of cybersecurity that protects. You're like, what the hell is that? I mean, so the services have a lot to fix on this before they worry about that. I do support, by the way, a singular OT school, totally separate from this. We need an OT school somewhere. I put it at Fort Leonard Wood or somewhere where there's already the Navy and the Air Force, unbeknownst to me, or the Navy and the Army, the Seabees and the Army Corps of Engineers have started some OT training together. We got to actually fund that, resource it, and drag the Air Force and Marine Corps into it.
Peter, then Dave.
So, sir, assuming the cyber force is a good idea and all, nothing's 100% good idea.
Yeah.
What are the drawbacks?
Well, first, we're not solving the number one one's what Jan said, without a doubt. Number two is there will be a perturbation. Now, it won't be I would tell you, Tim Hawk did a very good interview that was hard for me to counter that, hey, whenever you do this, there's going to be a perturbation. I looked at the Space Force. I wasn't 100% because the Space Force did Space Command, then Space Force pretty tight on each other. Cyber Command's been out there for 15 years. I'm a little less worried about the big perturbation. And I think the space perturbation wasn't that bad. I mean, I don't think we stopped analyzing space. I didn't hear about any satellites colliding, right? I think we still were doing our job. So I think we can still do our job. But do I think an iterative change right now would beat a significant change right now? Yes, because the iterative would take hold within months. And my answer is do your iterative change. That's fine. But do the significant change too. They've got these 3 centers they want to set up at Cyber Command. I'm sure you're briefed on as part of 2.0. If Katie briefed you for 45 minutes, I promise you briefed them. She's brilliant. I'm for them. And by the way, Cyber Force will take them over when they get up, when they're up and running. But in the meantime, get them going. So the perturbation issue is a good argument against it. The SOCOM one isn't. And we have battle space for this isn't. That NSA is not going. I'm going to tell you that I was part of the team that wrote the legislation to separate the two. But we put a very big kicker in there that said when it's certified to be up and running, it's not. NSA is ready to run alone. I know there's 1 or 2 minor things they got to do if Cyber Command fell off the face of the earth tomorrow. But Cyber Command's not ready. Not in any way, shape, or form. So that's not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere for like 5 years. Even this president who felt he was lied to by Milley and Nakasone, he wasn't, but he felt that way. With Ezra Cohen out there buzzing around trying to make the separation happen, it's not going to happen. I just think there's too many intelligence professionals will get in the way of that, and raising Cain will, which really matters. The chairman matters in that decision. He has to sign off on it. And I've known Raising Cain a long time. I think he will stand in front of that. There's not a lot of trains he'll stand in front of, but that's a train he'll stand in front of. But if you don't separate them, keeping this 4th generation with that same team strikes me as really loading up 1 4-star. By the way, the longest COCOM gap in 30 years, 6 months, NSA and Cyber Command. And it matters when you don't have your COCOM. You don't get called up to the Hill. You don't get into the right meetings in the building. Sorry.
Dave, then John.
Hey, Mark, thanks for being here today. In my 38-year career at NSA, I had a chance to work highly technical and focused defensive operations. Then I had a chance to do very exquisite exploitation operations. I had a chance to work in Cyber Command as the executive director to help them advance some of the offensive operations. And then I went back to defense again to do defensive operations informed by all those different experiences. So when we think about a cyber force of the future, how do you see the opportunity to allow for our military and civilian workforces to move back and forth between offense, defense, exploitation, to get that full spectrum view, and then perhaps even come back to defense after the time in the seat in offensive operations to have that hacker mentality to defend our networks? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree with it. And that's one of the interesting, people would sometimes, I didn't list that as like one of the shortfalls because I actually think it's not. That I think it's actually exactly, the espionage is a little tough, but a percentage of the people will have to go to NSA like a percentage of the CMF goes or the cough goes to NSA. So, and they'll provide that. This group will provide that. So they'll get a little bit of espionage. They'll get the offense. Remember, our NMF is broken up, and I'd say 25% of the teams are defensive in nature. So they will be moving back and forth. And I do agree that at some point, you know, I would hold off, but I would have my arm broken by the SecDef if I was Cyber Force commander. And I would, and some percentage are going to have to do time work helping a service. Probably, and it's not the service they necessarily came from, it's the service for which they received that AQD for maritime set. You know, they spent their time figuring out how to break Russian tank brigades. They come back and help. That's a bad example. Russian like flight operations. They go back to the Air Force to explain how to protect domestic flight operations. By the way, the defense is in the Guard too. The Guard ones would be shifted instead of 75-25 would be 10-90. Like the Guard provides a little bit of surge on offense, but really is about the defense of our national critical infrastructure. And the reservists, by the way, I should add a thing, going in the private sector and back. That's inherently defensive operations, but boy, you get smart. I mean, I know you probably came across men and women who left NSA and came back. And generally speaking, unless there was a bitterness factor, they were really better. You know, because they got that skill set out there, that slightly better skill, and they didn't do it for money. They did it and they came back. And I just think I'm excited about that opportunity in this and about having the reserves that we can really call on. They could get larger and larger and larger.
John.
One of the reasons actually for the dual hat was, you know, NSA had expertise. And that expertise got developed over a very long period of time, right? And they had support from FFRDCs like IDA. What's your thought about how the cyber force, what kind of support do they need? Not just civilians, you know, who part of the cyber force doing whatever they do, but the support they need to develop capabilities.
Well, I love this idea. So this is where you can focus a lot of training money on, because you're starting at a higher lowest common denominator. I mean, I've been to the Title 10 school, and that's been about 5 years, but it started at a lowest common denominator I recognized, which is not good, right? And it should start at a lowest common denominator my son barely recognizes as a 20-year-old who's pretty IT savvy. And, you know, so you start at that, so your schools are better. You've got to maintain, I mean, the way NSA does it. NSA has particular certifications you get to do specific types of weapon systems. They have one of the reasons, I don't want to get into all of it, but the reason we can't have a split of NSA and Cyber Command right now is way too many skill sets are held only by one of the two. You can guess which one. So we've got to have a, mid-career training, later career training. And the beauty is civilian or uniform, you go into it. Look, we can't have someone collecting them like Boy Scout badges and they've got 14 attributes, because at some point you've got to keep the development of them. But having 3 or 4 of these attributes, it'll make them a thing. And by the way, I'd swing some of these people into the Guard on occasion, active duty people into the Guard, because at some point when you've really got it running and humming, you want the 75 CPTs in the Guard to be within shouting distance of the 150 growing hopefully to 300 CPTs in Cyber Command. They can't be like I'll be honest with you, Guard aviation and Guard infantry sometimes get pretty separated from active duty units. Now, 20 years of war closed that a little bit. I prefer not to have 20 years of war again. So, but in cyber, I'd like to keep them a little closer. By the way, these guys being in private sector helps them, the Guard. Sometimes they're better. I mean, if you go to the Virginia, they have a war game down. The Virginia Guard does. It's pretty impressive. I mean, I would put it on. I put it on level, not perfect, but on level with a fort game. A game done at the fort.
Okay. Thank you
Thanks.
for a very active conversation on all of these topics. Really appreciate it. We will now take a break for